The Clinton Avenue Reformed Church is proud to present the final in its series on Elijah, prophet and miracle worker.
Hello again. I'm Pastor Mark, pastor of Clinton Avenue Reformed Church in Bergenfield, New Jersey. Thank you for being here for what is now our last story about Elisha. Starting next week, we're going to be talking about stories of Jesus getting born. Because Christmas is coming in just a few weeks, and Christmas is really about Jesus' birth. The Santa Claus and snowman stuff, that's kind of fun. But the important part is Jesus. Jesus was born, and he was God on earth, who came down to tell us how we ought to live. But I'll tell you more about that next week. Right now, we're having our final Elisha story. Now, remember we talked about Naaman, the great general who had the leprosy and got cured? Well, there's a new general in the town of Aram. And he's making war against God's people. Things look absolutely hopeless. And finally, in desperation, the king of Judah went to the prophet Elisha. Said, what's going to happen? What's our future? What do we do? We might be killed. We might starve to death. I bet you wouldn't like that much. Do you like it when there's not much food in your house? Well, this is a whole town where there's very, very little food left. And there's an army right outside of town who's threatening you. That's scary. Well, I'll let Elisha tell you the rest of the story. He'll be on in just a moment, but please, you know the favor I'm going to ask you. Like this if you see it on Facebook. Comment on it. Share it on your Facebook pages. And invite everyone you know to hear our Bible stories. Bible stories are very important. They tell us who we are, who God is, what God expects from us. Those are important things to know. So, next week, we're going to get ready for the birth of Jesus in our new series of Bible stories. But in just a minute, Elisha's going to tell you, what do you do when there's an army at your doorstep? There's very little food left. Listen for Elisha. God bless you all. Well, hello, my friends. Welcome back. I'm glad you're here for this. This is my final story I'll be telling you. Pastor Mark's going to be telling you other stories in the weeks to come. I'm Elisha, of course, prophet of Israel. This story is one that's pretty strange. A lot of people don't understand it, but, well, for me, those those who follow God, it's pretty understandable. Remember I told you last week and the week before about Naaman, who was an Aramean general? Well, there's a new general now in the town of Aram. And he got a big army together and he laid siege to Jerusalem. That, of course, is the capital of Judah, southern part of Israel. That's where I was living. And this army was very big and very strong, and it was too strong for the armies of Judah to get rid of. Well, you know in your era about supply chains, right? Well, this whole army camped around the city, so no supplies could get into it. No food, no water, no cooking oil, no nothing. And while that was going on, of course, food and supplies were getting very, very scarce in the city. People were starting to really go hungry. And people were going around with jars of food, which used to be filled, now have very, very little food left, and they're wondering, how long can we live before we starve to death? Now, I don't know why it took them so long. The king knew who I was. He knows that I'm a prophet of Israel. You'd think he'd come and talk to me about it, but he didn't. I guess like Naaman, he thought he was such a hot shot, he didn't have to talk to God about his troubles. Well, finally he did come. He said, how long are we going to survive? That Aramean army is too big for us, and we can't get supplies in. We're all going to starve to death. I said, you know what? One day from now, just one day, there's going to be so much food here that the food prices are going to be cheap. Because no one's going to be able to get rid of all the food they have. So the prices are going to go down. The supply chain's going to increase. And everything's going to be fine. The king said, yeah, sure, right. Elisha, you've lost your mind. Well, it's not the first time I've heard that. Sometimes God tells us surprising things. But God's God. We're not. God knows more than we do. So, the next day, early in the morning, there had been some lepers. Now, we've talked about leprosy, how I cured Naaman of it, and how Gehazi received his leprosy because of his greed. There were 4 lepers who lived outside the city. That way they were isolated, they were quarantined, so no one else got leprosy from them. They sometimes would forage near the other army's camp. Sometimes they'd try to grab scraps of food. Well, they woke up and they said, I don't hear any noise from the Aramean camp. Now there's thousands of soldiers. And there's pack donkeys. And there's horses. We should hear some noise. So these lepers snuck over there. They took a look around. They couldn't see the army. The army was gone. The supplies were there. A lot of swords, helmets, things like that were there. Food was there. Water was there. No army. And there were tracks leading away from the camp. The lepers said, this is pretty strange. What's going on here? But what the heck? They took some coins for themselves. They ate their fill of food. Then one leper said, that city's starving. We can't keep all this food for ourselves. We got to go tell someone. So, the lepers came to the city and spread the news. The enemy camp is gone. Well, the people in the city said, this has to be a trick. The enemy army is probably camped over a hill somewhere. They probably moved over the hill where we can't see them. So when we come out of the city, they're going to jump on us. So the army commander sent just a few small groups of people. Said, okay, you go that way, and you go that way, you go that way. Look for the enemy. And they locked the city up again. And all these groups went out to scout them. And all they ever saw was footprints running away from the army encampment. They came back and they said, we rode a good long way and we see no sign of that army. Well, the city rejoiced and everyone ran out there and they had their fill of food and they even took home some extra. And supply routes were open up so they can now get food into the city. And people have been asking for years, what happened? Why did that army run? Were they afraid? Was there a plague? What made them suddenly just run away? Well, God told me He was going to make them leave. He never told me how. So I can't tell you. I can tell you, though, if times are really, really bleak, you just might hear God whisper, better days are coming. Better days are coming. And those days can come in very, very surprising ways. Always trust God. Do the right thing, honor God, and trust God. When you're living a life that pleases God, He'll bring you through every adversity. I have so enjoyed telling you these stories of my exploits. This is the last story I'm going to tell. Pastor Mark will be telling you other stories in the weeks to come. But thank you for listening. I hope you've learned a lot. I hope you live a life that pleases and blesses God. Thanks for listening. God bless you from Elisha, the prophet of Israel.